I have Barb Snyder here from EBI. Welcome, Barb. How are you today?
I am so excited to be here today to talk with you all about employee engagement. So thank you so much for having me.
Yes,
Yes.
we're so excited to have you. We have so many people that are really interested and excited about this topic. And why don't we just go ahead and get started? I apologize for the delay. You mentioned uh, so that you all know if you have or you would like to know more, please go ahead and type in the chat and we'll be happy to answer any of those questions that you might have. And let's get started, Barb. I'm excited to hear about employee engagement.
Awesome. All right. Can you hear me okay? Perfect. Awesome. All right, folks. So thank you so much for joining us today. I can't think of another topic as timely as what's going on in our labor market today. So today we are going to talk about what employee engagement is. We'll define it a little bit. We'll talk about how it has evolved over time. And then we're going to talk about some of the solutions that EBI has developed to kind of tackle some of these topics. So jumping to our agenda, we will talk a little bit about what I love to call the days of our lives. I don't know, Jessica, if you want to go to the next slide. Okay. Awesome. All right. I love to call it the days of our labor market lives. If you were a child of the 80s, you know all about the soap operas. And today we are going to talk a little bit of dramatics over the past 5 years. We'll talk a little bit about employee engagement in 2025, right? It's a big deal, lots of things going on. And then again, we'll talk about the EBI solutions and then hopefully have some time for you to ask some questions. But first, let me tell you a little bit about myself on the next slide. So I am Barb Snyder. I do work for Employee Benefits International, and I am responsible for kind of managing our human resources vertical at the firm. And I have lived in your world. I grew up in operations. I have been a part of multiple verticals, multiple industries in privately held companies, publicly traded companies. I've helped a couple companies go to IPO. So I have lived in your shoes. And for the past 12 years, I have operated in the HR realm. So I've been able to kind of see both sides of business. I am in no way, shape, or form kind of a labor analytics expert, but what I'm going to share with you today are some key statistics and some key trends that we are seeing in the labor market pool. And again, I think Melissa mentioned this. If you have questions, throw those into the chat and I'm happy to pause and answer those at any time. All right, so let's talk.
Make sure to. I know we're having feedback. So I will now.
All right, cool. All right, so kind of moving on to the labor market trends on our next slide. Let's take kind of a short and painful trip through history over the past 5 years. So before we do that, it's not as if there have not been a lot of changes in the labor market over time, right? The past 100 years, there's been a million things, a million dynamics that have impacted the workforce, right? We've been through every sort of political, socioeconomic, all sorts of things that have gone on in the world. It's a global world. There's many things that have changed. But today we're going to focus on just really the past 5 years, because I think it will tell a story that's very intimate to all of us on the phone themselves. So what has happened in 2020 to 2021? Moving on to our next slide. There's really 3 major buckets that we'll talk about, and then I'll dive into more of the details behind that. So according to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, that's kind of the organization that pools all of the data from employers across the country. If you didn't know this, there is an annual reporting that all companies do that share data with the government on how things are going, how many hires they made, their terminations, also they report compensation statistics. So this is a pretty accurate picture. So from February 2020 to February 2021, 2.4 million women and 1.8 million men left the labor market. We're going to talk about why here in a second. Our second box is a survey of 278 executives shared that they were reducing their office space by 50%, shifting their workforce long-term to hybrid collaborative or remote work spaces. You already know all the reasons why, but I'm going to dive back into those because it tells us the story of employee engagement. And then lastly, according to the US Department of Labor, 4 million workers quit their jobs in April of 2021, triggering what we call now the Great Resignation. And it does really mark the highest amount of voluntary turnover in over 10 years in the largest economic powerhouse countries in the world. So what happened? Now, I want to share this with you. In case you guys do not know this, there is a website that is managed by the CDC called the CDC COVID-19 Museum. And this museum captures a lot of what has triggered some of the employee engagement challenges that we have faced. So as you all know, in March of 2020 marked the beginning of the pandemic. The pandemic was declared, and around that time, there were really only 60 cases in the US of COVID, but near the April 1 mark, which was literally 2 weeks later after the pandemic started, 118,000 COVID cases were confirmed. And that same time, the Trump administration put the CARES Act in place. And so if you all remember the CARES Act, this was the act that provided federal aid to a lot of small businesses, right? And the intention of that was they knew what was coming down the pipeline. And so the feds put some money aside to help preserve small business during that time. We also saw that there were widespread travel bans. This was really the very beginning of the supply chain challenges that we would be faced with the next 5 years. Shortly after this, we start to see employee attitudes change about their employer, and largely because employers were not prepared to deal with the pandemic. I remember I was a head of HR at the time, and I remember getting this CARES Act and being told I needed to develop a remediation plan. How are we going to deal with COVID? And as an employer, we had no idea what to do, right? There were no resources put in place for this sort of pandemic. And the federal government wasn't prepared. The CDC, the WHO, nobody was really prepared for what was happening. And I remember going to the OSHA website, trying to claw down information on what I could tell my employees was coming, what I could tell my leadership was coming. So employees were picking up on the fact that we were not properly prepared for this time. So some of this you can see in these statistics. Now, if you're like, why did so many people leave the labor market? Well, what was happening during that time frame is that the COVID cases were really starting to escalate, and we shut down the schools, right? So when we shut down the schools, all of a sudden we had all of these millions of parents around the country that had to stay at home with their children, right? We started to see a huge uptick in women going back to that caregiver role. In fact, 56% of American women were working for a salary during that time frame. That means that there was a significant amount of women that left the workplace. They took on this caregiver role. And the reason this statistic is important is because it is the lowest amount of women in the workforce in the United States since 1986. So these were pretty catastrophic times for us. And as you can pick up on this is what started to drive some of the current state employee engagement challenges. So let's move to the next slide, which takes us deeper into 2022. Now, what we know is that employee engagement in 2019, which was obviously before the pandemic, was around 51%. So unengagement. So it wasn't great already. We were already starting to see some really angst in the labor market in the United States. But what we see 2 years later, really 3 years later, is that we have ballooned up to 68%. So unengagement really is defined as employees who are physically present but psychologically absent. They feel no connection to the company that they work for. And so when you have kind of this mentality, you start to see that they aren't reporting incidents. They're not sharing with you things that are not going well. You're going to start to see some turnover. You'll start to see a lot of disruption with your clients, your customers, et cetera. So this is not an ideal situation. We also see 1 million workers leave trade, transportation, and utilities in November 2022. The reason that's important is just 1 month earlier, 73,000 exited. So less than a month later, we have 1 million people exit the trades. 600,000 healthcare workers resign in November of 2022. Now, you probably don't remember why, but the reason is because COVID cases by the time November 2022 hit were 6 times higher than they were the previous November. And so there's high amounts of burnout in our healthcare workers. I'm sure you all remember this. They were basically walking off the job. They felt completely mentally depleted. They were not being cared for. And at the time, I was actually working as an HR leader in healthcare, and they were just done physically. They were getting sick, just everything, and they couldn't even care for their own families. They would go home and they would shower in their driveway and strip down, put on clean clothes before they'd go in to see their family. So there's a lot of burnout that happened. And so where did these people go? Well, 55% went to other industries, right? There's a massive influx of other industry opportunities. And what we start to see is the trickle down cost of $630 billion in the United States. So you all know and understand the cost of turnover, right? You have to go out and recruit for this new person. You have to train them. They have to onboard. And then there's this long learning curve for them to get fully up to speed. So there's a lot of costs involved. That chart that you see on the right side of the screen, let's spend some time talking about it. So I mentioned to you that the transportation and the utility sector saw a huge amount of people leaving that industry, right? Well, remember what was happening during that time. There was a lot of incentive for people to go back to school, right? Because there was a lot of people working from home. There were a lot of incentives to get additional education. A lot of people were burned out from basically just being abused during that time. And so they want to do something completely different. So you see an explosive growth in professional and business services. But yet we're still seeing growth in transportation warehousing. So there was actually a huge uptick in the trade school. So people are attending trade schools or getting their CDL. They knew they could get work there because they didn't have to work in an office environment. They were not having to work around large varieties of people. Lots of income potential there. Education services makes perfect sense, right? So people are getting additional education so that they can go into these other areas. Makes perfect sense. Now, what you see at the very bottom is a negative 932,000 in leisure and hospitality. And remember, there was a travel ban that was put in place. And this travel ban, when everything from leisure, resorts were closing, you couldn't get to many places around the world, you couldn't take a cruise with your family. All of these things were completely kiboshed during that time. Also, there was a travel ban on the unvaccinated during this time. And also migrant workers were also on a travel ban. So when you put all of these things together, this story kind of starts to make sense again. And I know we've all tried to mentally block out this time frame, but all of these key data points and these key nuggets contribute tremendously to get to, which is on our next slide, which is 2023. So do you guys remember 2023? I know I do, because I remember that there was just tremendous fatigue from COVID, right? People were just over it. They didn't want to hear about it anymore. They weren't going to wear their masks anymore. The mask mandates finally ended. The travel bans were lifted so people could go traveling around where they wanted to be, but people were over it. And what was happening in our workplaces? let's think about what was happening. There were still many industries that were requiring masking, many industries that also begun to require vaccinations and proof of vaccinations and proof of getting the booster shots. So employees are starting to feel uneasy. There's this part where they wanted the protection during the early days of COVID because we didn't understand it. But then later on, it turned into, well, why are you telling me what I need to do with my body? We started to see some emergence there. And along with that, organizations started to say, well, I let you work remote during the pandemic because we didn't understand it. And in many cases, we're required to work remotely, but now we want you back in office. And in 2023, employees, as you know, did not love being told they had to come back to the office. Now, during the time where they were working remote, they were receiving recognition for being productive working from home. And now their organizations were telling them to return to the office. And so obviously that didn't sit very well. They had crafted a new world where they could be productive working from home. We also started to see an increase in employers monitoring their employees' productivity, and employees found that out, right? So the companies for forever have been monitoring building access, logging into computers, but now they were using technology to monitor how many keyboard clicks, how many times they were in Word, all these things. So employees were finding this out and they were reporting it on social media in just outrageous amounts, right? And so what we started to see in 2023 is exactly what this slide talks about, is quiet quitting, right? And ghosting. Those were the two kind of trendiest words for 2023. And what we saw is that 85% of the employee population could be quiet quitting. Now, for those of you who are like, what does that even mean? Let's define quiet quitting more thoroughly. So quiet quitting really has multiple meanings. One is they're not engaged in the work that they're doing, right? So they're there, they're doing, they're pushing the mouse around. You saw a million videos on social media. People had tied strings around their mouse to make sure that their screen looked active, right? A lot of that sort of going on. But what were they really doing? Well, for a lot of people, they were working a second job, right? So they were working two jobs, or they were out, traveling and spending time with family and friends, right? And there was this saying that started around that time of, let's see how long it takes for my employer to know that I'm not really working, right? So a lot of that started to emerge. And then along the tails of the Great Resignation, we started seeing this ghosting trend, right? Employees would just not show up for work again. Candidates would just not show up for interviews. They would schedule all these interviews and then not show up for the interview. I think you've all probably experienced that to some degree. I know that I did. And it still shocks me to this day when we would schedule a fantastic candidate only for them to not show up, or we would have a fantastic employee only for them to disappear and never to be heard from again. So that was a pretty significant labor trend in 2023. Now, what you probably see on the lower right is a new trend called loud quitting. And now that trend really began in 2023, but it's not going to peak until 2025. But before we get to there, let's talk about 2024. All right, so in 2024, we see the world is completely open again. Everybody's going to Hawaii. Every single human being I know went to Hawaii last year, and the poor island just couldn't handle the amount of folks that visited them. But what we also see is that unemployment has now dropped to pre-pandemic levels. Now, remember, we had significant amount of people that departed the workforce during the peak of the pandemic because the schools were closed, daycares were closed, offices were closed, right? And so what we see is people are starting to return to office through mandates by their company. The schools are open. We're kind of back to this normal situation. I hate the term new normal because I don't really think we'll ever go back to anything different, but so it's just our normal now. I actually failed to mention the supply chain challenges during that time. Now, remember, we had this outrageous exodus in the transportation industry. And because all of these manufacturing facilities were closed, obviously we see a significant backup in supply chain domestically, and then even more so abroad. But we start to see the supply chain get caught up in 2024. Now, what was the biggest challenge of 2024? Well, obviously, the US election. That is what impacted us both domestically, but if you remember, the world was watching, right? We had Joe Biden, who was up for re-election. We had Donald Trump come back on the scene, seek the nomination from the Republican Party. We see the exodus of Joe by his party, and Kamala steps up to the plate. So there's a lot of uncertainty about what's going to happen. And the US population, as you know, you all lived it as well, they're watching what's playing out in Donald Trump's campaign, right? We saw multiple attempts on his life. We hear him making bold statements about changes in the economy, things that he's going to do. And so a lot of people, a lot of organizations start tightening the belt immediately. We start to see layoffs. We start to see contraction. We start to see people hanging onto their wallet a little tighter. Well, what happens to employees when you do that? Immediately they start going, okay, well, if there's a layoff, I'm going to start looking for a job. Okay, well, if there's a layoff, they start to get concerned about those things. The thing that's interesting about this, that the social attitude that started to arrive around this part, is that employees were not necessarily paying attention to the behavior of organizations during the pandemic could not be sustained, right? There was a lot of incentives being thrown at employees, a lot of bonuses being paid, a lot of promises, a lot of remote work. Those are not sustainable practices. And as business leaders, you all know that. At some point, you have to return. The economy has to return to the pre-pandemic time period. And so that's what started to happen in late 2024, especially after the election, right? I think then we all started to breathe again because you may not have agreed with who was elected, but you could finally breathe because you know what's coming, right? So as we've evolved into 2025, on our next slide, let's talk about what's happened. So employees they've seen the ups and downs of the pandemic, and they've seen the employers attempt a responsible management of this, right? We evolved as organizations from we have no idea how to handle this to, okay, I think we know what we're going to do. And then things would shift again with each variant of COVID, each mask mandate, the supply chain challenges. And we're just rolling with the punches, trying to constantly evolve through this. Well, employees, they're not necessarily forgiving of all of the challenges that we faced as business owners. They just expect us to show up, right? They are here to help us be successful. They're expecting us to, support them. So what we're now seeing in social media is this revenge quitting. It's the loud quitting that we started to hear about in 2023. Now it's, I'm very burned out. I am done with all of corporate America, and this is where I'm at. Now on this slide, I'm going to jump around a little bit and start with the Glassdoor bullet point, which is the third major bullet point down. Now, I don't know about you, but Glassdoor is the bane of my existence. It's really the place where employees go when they want to complain about their boss, about their company. There's very little positive data that's on Glassdoor, but I did find it interesting that 17% of workers report lower wages and career standing as a result of the Great Resignation. Now, this is exactly what I mentioned earlier. What was happening during the pandemic, throwing money at people, was not sustainable. It was a short-term fix, right? At some point, we have to normalize the work environment. And so employees were reporting that. They're like, okay, well, the wages are lower, but were they lower, or were they returning to the pre-pandemic wages? Well, they were normalizing. They were normalizing back to what they were pre-pandemic. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics kind of confirms that. They have now published information saying pay rates dropped to pre-pandemic levels. So we see these compensation benchmarking pieces really bell during 2022 and come back down to 2019 levels at this time. All right, let's circle back here to this one bullet point. I love 431,000 new business applications were filed in the US in January of this year. That's astounding. So during the pandemic, we saw a lot of people going out and doing Uber Eats. They were doing these little side hustles, right? But now we're seeing this is a much bigger play. We're seeing that people are quitting their corporate America job and they are launching entrepreneurial endeavors, right? That's the point of the new business application. And the side hustle culture has evolved into something much bigger. And we're not seeing it in one specific generation. We're seeing it in all of the generations that are in the workforce today. Obviously, Gen Z, the most unhappy and the most vocal on social media, 57% of that are Gen Z. But you also see on there, you see quite an uptick in boomers, right? They're sick of corporate America too. And, they still have life in them. They still want to stay active and do something that earns them some income. So, business applications there. And when I dove deeper into where those business applications were, it may not surprise you to find out that many of them were related to real estate transactions or financial analyst transactions or going into consulting businesses. We've seen a significant uptick in the volume of real estate agents, financial analysts, and consultants around the country, right? So that's where a huge piece of that has come. So lots and lots of changing and shifting social attitudes. And hopefully you have picked up through this conversation that many of these attitudes have been impacted by something that didn't exist, 15 to 100 years ago. So although many of these things, we've been through outbreaks before, right? Everybody kept saying, oh, the Spanish flu, oh, polio outbreak. Yes, those things were all true, right? And so COVID-19 maybe shouldn't have been as big a deal as all of those were too, right? But the difference is that we had social media, legacy media, all of these played a significant factor in this shifting social attitudes that we have seen in the United States and really across the world. So lots of shifting social attitudes. So you're probably thinking to yourself, where do we go from here? So on our next slide, I love to talk about George Costanza. If you were a child of the 80s and 90s, Seinfeld was everything, right? So serenity now. So as a business leader, what can you do? I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted from listening to Barb even talk about this over the past 25 minutes, much less the fact that I lived it for the past 5 years. Where can we find some reprieve from this? So let's solve for some of these challenges together, because I think we all know exactly where we've come from. So let's talk about employee engagement on our next slide. So employee engagement, break it down together, going on to our next slide. I mentioned at the very beginning of our conversation, employee engagement really is the attitude that employees have about their organization. And another way to put this is, it is the emotional commitment a team member has to the organization. Now, employee engagement is not necessarily happiness. I define happiness as kind of this, it's not a constant state of being, right? We can't be happy 24 hours a day, right? So employee engagement really isn't about happiness. Employee engagement is not necessarily that I love my job. It's actually that I am emotionally committed to the organization that I work, which means then that I'm going to give it discretionary energy or superhero energy, the sweat equity, whatever you want to call it. It's that extra oomph that somebody is willing to give their organization. And the reason they're willing to give it is because they believe in the purpose of the company, they believe in the mission of the company, they believe in the values of the company. Now, values are How effectively do we provide communication? Do we involve our employees? Do we care about their career development? All of those things, right? In a minute, we're going to talk about what are the definitions of employee engagement themselves. But I think as business leaders, we need to keep in mind that we are responsible for providing for our employees information, resources, supplies to do their job, performance goals, performance reviews, telling them how they're doing, rewards and recognition, communicating with them, making them part of the team, bringing them along, right? So when I talked a lot about the pandemic and that we didn't always have all the answers, guess what? I told my employees, we have no idea what we're doing. We have no idea, but we're going to figure it out. And we want you to come along with us. We want your partnership in this. And we admittedly don't have all the answers. Guess what? Employees love that. They want you to be honest and transparent and bring them along, right? So let's define what employee engagement is on the next slide. All right, there's really 3 levels of employee engagement. These are probably familiar to you. So engagement, unengaged, and actively disengaged. Somebody who's engaged, I just talked to you about, is somebody who's emotionally committed to the company, right? So I talked about some of the reasons somebody could be engaged, but the byproduct is they're more productive and they tend to stay with the company longer, right? And we talked about the cost of turnover earlier in one of the slides. During the peak of the pandemic, $630 billion wasted on voluntary turnover. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have that money back? It'd be wonderful to save that money. So when we have engaged team members, folks that are emotionally committed to the company, they tend to be productive and they stay longer, right? So that next level are unengaged. These are my fence riders. These are people who I could tilt to the engaged side, or if I don't behave properly or something happens outside of my control, they could go to actively disengaged. These are folks that are productive. They're showing up for work every day. They're punching the clock. They're doing what you ask of them, but they're not psychologically connected. They're not necessarily emotionally connected to what they're doing every day. They can be, you can get them engaged. They're just not currently for whatever reason. And I'm sure you know some of those people. Now, the third category is actively disengaged. These are individuals who I call destructive. These are folks that you probably don't want in your organization. They are physically, not always physically present, but they are typically physically present, but they are psychologically absent in every way, shape, or form. They are destructive, they're toxic, and they're super unhappy, and they love to tell everybody. Anyone who's going to be an audience for them, they're going to tell them about it. It could be on social media. It could be with other team members. It's going to be the folks that are making your leadership team's lives hell. Those are the actively disengaged people. And those are folks that you probably don't want to have in your organization, right? Now, it's important as business leaders that we focus on engagement and we focus on the unengaged. Now, Gallup polls, I'm sure you've all heard of Gallup polls. They've been around for about 40 years. What they tell us is that the unengaged workforce remains steady at about 51% in 2025. Now, if you remember from one of my earlier slides, I mentioned to you that unengagement had peaked at 68% during the pandemic, right? Now, we've made some headway, we've made some improvement around that, but it remains steady at 51%. So what we try to do at EBI is we really try to come alongside our clients and talk about, of course, engagement, retaining those engaged people, but also what are the things that you can do to improve and get those folks in that unengaged category to move into the engaged realm, because that's really where you want to operate, right? All right, so this is my favorite statistic. When we talk about employee engagement, what or who is the largest factor impacting employee engagement? Now, some people, because I've commented a few times, might say it's social media. Some people might say it's family and friends, coworkers, right? But it's actually leaders. It's actually managers. If you do a little click there, you'll see that 70%. Go ahead and click it. Yeah, there you go. 70% of employee engagement is predicated on the manager. Why is that? Well, as leaders, we have a responsibility to provide adequate resources to our team members to make sure they're set up for success, providing them with goals to accomplish, outlining performance expectations, providing recognition, rewards, performance reviews, pay increases, right? Making them feel part of the team, communicating with them, inviting them to collaborate, right? And then providing them with career development and personal opportunities for growth and learning. All of those things are driven by our leaders. And for most of you, you have leaders that have direct reports, and their whole purpose in your company is to provide supervision, right? Supervision. Think about it. That term in and of itself, their entire purpose is to grow and develop, retain, attract, all those things, employees. So as a leader, measuring employee engagement is really important for your organization, but caring for your leaders is the most important. So what do we do at EBI? Let's talk about some solutions that we do for our clients. So in addition to, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. In addition to helping measure employee engagement, which we'll talk about, we help you celebrate the things that you're already doing well and create retention solutions for your employees, but also your leadership team. So I mentioned during the past 5 years, we've seen a lot of burnout. Well, rank and file employees are not the only ones burned out. Our leadership teams are burned out, and they need to be fed as well. And now the proper care and feeding of leadership teams is not always compensation, although it helps, right? A lot of times our leaders want us to make investment in them. They want us to measure their engagement. They want us to hear from them what their needs are, what their career goals are, and what they want to accomplish, right? And it's important that we take a look at those things. So EBI, we do provide employee engagement training. So rank and file employees, we do partner along with them to hear their voice and what's working well at their employer, right? But we also want to listen to the leadership team. Since they own 70% of employee engagement, we want to come alongside them and help them win, help them experience success, because the byproduct of that is the rank and file employees are also engaged. So we do provide employee engagement surveys along with that, right? And after we do the survey, we love to analyze the aggregate results of the survey. And what that looks like is we have a series of questions that we ask your employees, including your leadership team, about the work environment itself, right? Do you have the tools necessary to do your job effectively? Do you feel engaged? Has somebody talked to you about recognition that has driven your engagement? Has somebody provided you performance feedback? Has somebody asked you about your opinion? Does your opinion matter in the work that you do? Do you believe in the mission, vision, values of the company you work for? So the questions in the survey are not, do you like your supervisor? Or, has anyone ever performed anything unethical? It's not that sort of a survey. It touches much more on that discretionary energy that I mentioned, that emotional connection that we want to build with the organization. After we aggregate results, we always share them with the leaders very transparently. There's an opportunity for employees to There's an opportunity for employees to write in some things about the organization that are going well, some things that are not going well. And it's more than I want a pay increase, right? It's typically, I would like more training. I would like to hear more from our CEO. Why don't we have town hall meetings? Those sorts of things. And all of that is valuable insight, right? And then we also go into goal setting, and we also craft ways for you to hit those goals. It could be a net promoter score. We love net promoter scores. And then also we craft opportunities to celebrate with your team members the areas that you are really knocking it out of the park. Now, I circle back to leadership development and coaching because this is everything, right? Oftentimes, leaders have found themselves in leadership roles not because they went to college to be a leader, but because they did really well in a technical level position, and then eventually we just put them over people, and now they're a people leader, right? But we never really came alongside them and taught them how to lead people. And leading adults it's not a small task, as you all know. So we also provide leadership development and coaching, and then also we act as a thought partner for our leaders. And through the past 5 years, we've learned a tremendous amount about employee engagement and how much the world has evolved. And sometimes just knowing how we've evolved and gotten to this part is enough of a thought partner, but we love to do that with our clients. Now, if you are going on to our next slide, if you were looking for anything above and beyond that, obviously we do provide lots of other hands-on HR support, fractional CHRO, plug and play HR leadership. That's a big part of my role. We also help come alongside you with your HR technology. If you're using Paycor, Paycom, any of the pays, UKG, ADP, Rippling, any of them, we come alongside, help you optimize the technology you have, or go to market to see what else might be out there. I mentioned to you compensation benchmarking. We are returning back to pre-pandemic wages, right? 2019 wages, we've renormalized compensation. So we also come alongside our clients and we take a look at compensation as well. M&A, harmonization and integration. Many of you are in the heat of doing M&A activity, whether it's due diligence, whether it's opening up new verticals or attracting new verticals to merge and or buy. We come alongside you with those sorts of things, and everything else you can read on here. But that is basically it in a nutshell. Are there any questions that we can answer today?
We do have a question. How do you deal with a manager so pushy and a slave driver?
A manager who's pushy and a slave driver. Yeah. Is it from the manager? Yeah. Is it from the employee's perspective, or?
Or do you want to add into? They're not responding. But how would you deal with, like, let's say from an employee perspective, how would you deal with a manager
that is not as okay. So I think it probably is somebody who's unhappy with their leader, right? That we're talking a little bit about. But I think it's a careful dance, right? So if your leader is harsh with you, I think first it's always seeking to understand, right? They're my two favorite phrases when it comes to understanding my boss in every position I'm in is really two things: seeking to understand their perspective. Why might they react that way? What's going on? Usually it has nothing to do with you. Usually it's many, many other things, right? And then the second thing is assume positive intent, right? Oftentimes, because people react to us in a certain way and it's largely not because of us, we have to assume that their intentions with us are positive until they prove positive that they're not, right? But I always encourage people, if they are not happy with their leader, things have not gone well with their leader, is to find a trusted person in the organization to talk with about that. If you have an HR person that you can talk confidentially about that, if there is another leader that you can talk about that, But typically I find talking first with the leader themselves, because they may not be aware of how they're coming across. And they may also share some insight with you as to what's going on. They might be dealing with some things completely outside your periphery, and share some of that with you, but they may not be aware of how they're coming across to you. So sharing with them can be beneficial. It's a careful dance, though. It's careful on how you present that information to them, because you want them to be receptive of it, right? So it's not, why are you such a jerk to me, right? That's never how we want to approach people. It's like, hey, you know what? I've picked up some energy. Is there anything going on? Have I done upset you? Is there anything you want to share with me that might, improve or enhance our relationship? That's what grown-ups do, right? So that's some feedback there. Again, assume positive intent and seek to understand, right?
Sure.
Before we get to judge.
Sure. I have a question from what about control managers? I guess that might mean like they're more, they have to be in control. They're not releasing, I'm sure, not releasing the decision-making power to the team. I'm assuming that's what Jody means by control managers.
So maybe it's a controlling manager. So I'm assuming that if somebody is micromanaging you, is that there's probably not enough trust built between the two of you for them to relinquish the control, right? And the best way to build relationship with your leader is communication, right? Sharing with them what you're working on, sharing with them your progress. Also, not just bringing problems to your leader, but bringing solutions to them, right? Most leaders don't want you to come and vomit everything that's broken on them. They want you to bring a problem to them, but also bring some suggested solutions. So control is usually about a lack of trust in a situation. And if you can build some trust with your leader, most of the time they will relinquish some of the reins and some of the control, right? Not in all cases, right? We deal with human beings, and human beings are on every spectrum of the evolutionary train, including each one of us, right? So, but I would definitely work on building trust and communicating effectively.
Anyone else have any other questions? All right. Well, all helpful for everyone. And Barb, I want to thank you for engaging EO Arizona today. And this was very insightful and helpful, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me. And if anyone has any questions or comments after the fact, feel free to reach out to me. I don't know if we provide the slides or my email address, but I'm happy to answer anything that comes up later.
Thank you so much. I can always provide the contact information. Everybody has my email, and I'm happy to provide Barb's information for sure. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you so much. Happy Easter.